Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
I'm Jill, the host of the Nourish Child. Let me ask you something. Do you wonder if your child is getting all the nutrition they need? Or do you feel unsure about what's going on with your child and their eating? Feeding kids is hard. I've raised 4 of my own children, and as a pediatric dietitian who works with kids and families, I know the job of nourishing and nurturing our children is a big one, full of emotional swings, frustrations, and worries. That's why I created the nourishchild.com, the ultimate parent resource for children's nutrition and feeding. There, you will find free articles, e-guides, and programs to help you better understand your child, food, your own feeding, and their eating. Check out The Nourish Child today. Head to thenourishchild.com. And now for the show. Hey friends, welcome back to the Nourish Child podcast. Jill here, and today I'm talking about how to help kids with low iron. So I wrote a blog post about this. I'll link it up in the show notes, but I wanted to talk about it because it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. My first child, who is now 27, in her first year of life, we struggled after we started solids together. And she wasn't very interested in solid foods and became underweight at her 1-year appointment. And when we went back for a checkup at 18 months, she had started to gain weight again, which was great news. But we found out that she was anemic. So she had an iron deficiency. And I have to say that back in those days, over, 25 years ago, I probably relied too much on cow's milk for her to help her gain weight. And that in turn compromised her iron status. So that's why this topic is so near and dear to me. I've experienced it, I've lived it, and I get a lot of questions about it. So I wanted to cover sort of what it does for your child, what the difference between iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia is, and what you can do to help your child, either through food or through supplementation. So I'm going to get to that towards the end. So let's start off with, what does iron do for your child? Well, iron has many functions in the body. During infancy, iron is super important for building the structure of the brain and the channels that allow information to be communicated back and forth through the brain. And then as we get into childhood and into adulthood, iron is needed to make hemoglobin, which is the element in our body that carries oxygen to all of our cells, our organs, and our tissues. And just like we can't breathe and live without oxygen, our organs and tissues don't do well without it either. So what's the difference between iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia? So iron deficiency is basically a term describing a decrease in the total amount of iron in the body. So there's just not enough iron in the body. Iron deficiency anemia, though, occurs when an iron deficiency is severe enough to affect what is called erythropoiesis, or the body's ability to make red blood cells. The good news, or sort of the challenging news, is the body's pool of iron will always try to remain stable. So the body will absorb iron at higher rates if it needs more, and at lower rates if it needs less. It basically absorbs iron to match what it needs. But when there's a lack of iron intake, or iron losses from the body are higher, the balance of iron in the body is affected, resulting in iron deficiency, and later, if the situation isn't reversed, iron deficiency anemia. So what are the symptoms in children of low iron? Well, sort of the obvious ones are things like pale skin, pale lips, pale hands. A child can be irritable or fussy. They can have very low energy or be easily tired, easily fatigued. They may have a fast heartbeat. They might have a sore or swollen tongue. On physical exam by a physician, they might have an enlarged spleen. And the other thing that we see with children who have low iron is this desire to eat odd things like dirt or ice or paint chips or any kind of non-food item. There are 4 main causes for low iron in children. Number 1, low consumption of iron-rich foods. Number 2, high iron demands from the body. So we see this during high periods of growth, like during infancy and adolescence. We also see it during a female or a girl's entry into menstruation. So she has higher demands from the body during that time, and also higher losses of iron through her menses. Number 3, reduced absorption of iron in the GI tract. So there are certain gastrointestinal conditions that can increase the risk for iron losses in the intestines, like celiac disease or any other GI condition that interferes with absorption of nutrients. And number 4, of course, loss of blood. So menstruation, number 1, but any kind of, if you have an injury and there's a great loss of blood, that puts a child at higher risk for low iron. So how do you know if your child is deficient in iron? Well, the gold standard is to do blood tests for low iron, and a complete blood count, or a CBC, with a serum ferritin is the gold standard for diagnosing an iron deficiency. So when we see a hemoglobin level below normal and a ferritin below 20 nanograms per milliliter, this represents iron deficiency anemia. So a low hemoglobin and a ferritin below 20 is iron deficiency anemia. When you see a ferritin below 20 with a normal CBC and a normal hemoglobin, this is consistent with iron deficiency without anemia. So ferritin is a test that can look normal when your child is sick because it reacts to what is going on in the body and brings up or elevates that ferritin level, particularly when there's an illness or extra stress. So, for example, if you do this test when your child has an ear infection or a cold, for instance, the ferritin level may be falsely elevated and appear to be normal. So you definitely want to check ferritin when your child is healthy. It'll give you a much more accurate reading. So who do I think is at risk, or who do I suspect when I'm working with families whose children I'm helping? These are the conditions or the children or the situations that make me suspicious of low iron. So number 1, breastfed babies whose mothers were or are iron deficient during pregnancy or breastfeeding, or who haven't started iron supplementation at 4 months of age. So this is a near and dear category for me because I was iron deficient throughout my entire first pregnancy. In fact, we chased my iron levels the entire pregnancy with increasing iron supplementation, and I could never get to a normal iron level. I don't know why, but I couldn't. And when my firstborn was born, I nursed her. So I was a nursing mother who was iron deficient, and at the point of which I started nursing, I was pretty tired of taking these very high doses of iron. And back then, 27 years ago, iron pills were horse pills and they caused quite a bit of constipation. And we didn't have the formulations of iron that we do now. And so by the time my baby was born, I was like, I am done with these iron supplements. So I was a breastfeeding mother who was deficient and who was not taking iron supplementation. So I believe that a big reason why my daughter was iron deficient at 18 months was because she had low iron endowment at birth, which basically means she did not get to build up the stores of iron that she should have normally done because I was iron deficient. Number 2, picky eaters or extremely picky eaters who eliminate meat, beans, and iron-rich vegetables, or those picky eaters who drink more than 2 cups of milk per day. So you can kind of get the sense that even in my own experience, there was a perfect storm building. Because my daughter became underweight at a year, I was plugging milk as a great calorie source for her. But that calcium in that milk interferes with iron absorption. And so she was definitely getting more than 2 cups of milk per day. And she was just set up for an iron deficiency. The third situation that makes me suspicious of low iron is preteen and teenage girls with heavy menstrual bleeding. So that's the obvious loss of blood is always going to put a child at a higher risk for iron deficiency. Some athletes, especially females who underfuel or consume few animal foods like meat or chicken, children with digestive problems that interfere with iron absorption, like inflammatory bowel disease or malabsorption disorders like celiac disease. Another category that makes me suspicious, children and teenagers who follow a vegan or vegetarian diet. Also, children with pica behaviors who like to chew on ice, rocks, or paint chips. I'm going to be very suspicious of an iron deficiency in that case. And then last, any baby that's born premature or who has been born with a low birth weight. There's that period of time during pregnancy, mainly the last trimester, where the iron stores are really built up. And so if a baby's born premature, they don't get that same timeline to build up their iron stores while still in the womb. So those are the situations that would make me suspicious of a child who may have a low iron status. So before I get into what to do if your child or teen is iron deficient, I want to just make a couple of comments about a couple of things. Number one, I just wanted to say that I have a few parents who are lined up for interviews for an anonymous one-time counseling session for the purpose of being on the podcast. So I'm very excited to introduce this feature to the show. I know that some of you may have frustrations or questions or just want to review things or even just talk about the struggle or talk about the frustration with somebody who's willing to listen and give some feedback and advice. That would be me. If that is you, if you're feeling like, gosh, I just want to have a conversation about why my child's so picky, or I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing with starting solids, or I've got an athlete who I'm not sure I'm feeding them right, come on to the show. Let's talk about it. I will keep your name, your child's name, your location, all other identifying factors private. You will be anonymous. It will just be your voice. And you and I will have a conversation and we'll share it with everybody else because I think it can be really beneficial for others to listen in. So I wanted to invite you to consider coming on the show for a one-time counseling session. It'll be about 30 minutes, super simple to do. You can contact me, jill@jillcastle.com, and let me know you'd like to come on the show and we'll get you set up to do that. Or you can go to The Nourished Child, click the podcast tab, and there'll be a little microphone there, and you can record your question there and just say, Jill, I'd like to talk about this on your show. I will immediately get your question and we'll get in touch with you and get something set up. So that's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to say is if you know that you need more help and want more support, I do have a couple of spaces open in my private practice. You can sign up for a 3-month package or a 6-month package. I'll include a link to all the information about that whole process. But I'm here if you need me for a limited number of families, but I do have some spots open. It's a good time to get on top of things. If you're raising a child with a large body or a small body or a picky eater or an overeater or an athlete or a child or several children rather, that you're trying to feed and do right by, I can help you. So you can find out information about my private practice over on jillcastle.com and just go under the consulting tab and hit private practice and you'll see a form with a lot of information on it right there. Okay, what do you do if your child or teenager is iron deficient? So there are two main pathways. Number one, you're going to add iron-rich foods. And number two, you're going to assess for the need for an iron supplement. So I do want to make a note. If your child does have an iron deficiency or has iron deficiency anemia, you'll want to address this as soon as possible. Always speak with your pediatrician about supplementation before you start giving it to your child, because too much iron can be detrimental. I also want to say that if your child's deficient or has anemia, an iron-rich diet won't necessarily correct a true iron deficiency or an anemia quickly. It takes a long time to reverse iron deficiency with food alone. So I just want to put that out there. Whatever you do, always make sure you get your child's ferritin checked and make a really well-informed decision before you start supplementation. Okay, path number one, add iron-rich foods. So you can offer good sources of iron like red meat, the dark meat from poultry, beans, grains, dark leafy vegetables, prunes, and raisins every day. If you are starting a baby on solids at around 6 months, you definitely want to focus on solid foods with a high iron content like meat as a first food and or iron fortified cereals. Remember, iron is a very key nutrient to early brain development, so we don't want to forget about iron. Too much cow's milk, I mentioned this before. Too much of it can interfere with iron absorption and reduce the consumption or the eating of iron-rich foods. So when your child is drinking more than 2 cups of milk a day, it starts to crowd out all those other foods that can contribute iron. So we want to make sure things are in a good balance. For toddlers, you want to limit their milk intake to 16 ounces or less per day, if possible. If you scooch up to 20 ounces, I don't think that's that big of a deal, but on average, try to shoot for 16 ounces or less per day. You can find more iron-rich foods for babies, kids, and teens over on my website, thenourishedchild.com. There's tons of free resources there, including articles that specify iron needs for all of those age groups. Okay, let's talk about the iron supplement pathway. So if your child does have an iron deficiency, the dose to correct this will be higher than what you will find in a multivitamin and mineral supplement. So I want to say that again. The dose to correct an iron deficiency will be higher than what you can find in a standard multivitamin and mineral supplement. And it may be higher than the standardized dose that you get in an over-the-counter iron product. So you want to talk with your healthcare provider about the proper dosing for your individual child, because dosing is based on weight. So, as I mentioned, kids with anemia will need a higher dose of iron. Now, the form of the iron is important too. Ferrous sulfate is the form of iron that is best absorbed. So on my website, in that some of those free articles, I have an article called Iron Deficiency in Kids, and I review my go-to iron supplements there. So I will include a link to that article so you can check that out. But I have, as many clinicians do, we have our go-to iron sources that we like. I have mine. I'm sure others out there have theirs, but I list the ones that I've been using for years and decades and their forms and why I like them the best. So you can go see that over on the website. So obviously, when children and teens have an iron deficiency, the treatment should focus on iron supplementation with a goal of correcting the deficiency as quickly as possible. So for infants and toddlers, the treatment dose is 3 milligrams per kilo per day. And for older kids and teens, it's 325 milligrams once daily, which happens to be 65 milligrams of elemental iron. So see, I told you these doses are a little higher. Most brands of iron supplementation tend to deliver between 9 and 18 milligrams of elemental iron per dose. So just to give you a comparison, for that older kid and teen, they're going to need 65 milligrams of iron, elemental iron each day, most brands that you're going to find out there give between 9 and 18 milligrams of elemental iron per dose. So you need to make sure you read the package label for proper dosing and adjust based on your healthcare provider's direction on what the optimal dose would be for your child. If your child's taking iron drops, they can be taken with a small amount of orange juice or water on an empty stomach or with a meal. Some products already add vitamin C to increase the iron absorption. I don't recommend you give iron supplements with dairy foods, again, because the interference with absorption. Now, once you start your child on iron supplementation, you want to go back after 3 months and recheck the ferritin level and see how your child's iron status is recovering. The goal is to see ferritin levels rise above 20 nanograms per milliliter. Some children will take longer than 3 months to replenish their iron stores. So you have to be patient. Now, I always advise that if your child does have to start on an iron supplement, that you're also focusing on iron-rich foods. You're doing both. Because once you replenish your child's iron stores and they get back to normal, you're still going to want to feed them iron-rich foods so that they can maintain that normal level. Okay, folks, that's it for today. I hope that this little episode on iron deficiency and how to manage it was helpful to you. If it was, please share this episode with another mama or papa that you think would benefit from it. Until next time, make sure you give that child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.